More than 100 Chinese Navy and Coast Guard vessels have been spotted into the heavily contested South China Sea.
In late 2025, something unusual and unsettling unfolded around Taiwan. More than 90 Chinese warships surrounded the island. Fighter jets crossed long-respected invisible boundaries. Missiles streaked overhead before crashing into the sea beyond. Beijing called it a routine exercise. But make no mistake, exercises are rehearsals. They measure timing, coordination, readiness, and sometimes they signal what could come next. Taiwan isn't just another disputed island. It's a global tech powerhouse, a critical hub for semiconductor production, and a strategic position that could give China a dominant edge in the Western Pacific. For decades, China has claimed Taiwan as its own. But today, that claim is backed by something far more serious: the largest naval buildup in modern history and a long-term strategy built on pressure, isolation, and control. So, the real question has changed. It's no longer, does China want Taiwan? It's now, does China believe anyone can stop it? To understand this tension, you have to go back to the aftermath of World War II. China's civil war ended without a true resolution. Two rival governments emerged, each claiming to be the legitimate China. One retreated to Taiwan and survived. The other stayed on the mainland and never gave up on unification. Decades later, that unfinished conflict has evolved into one of the most dangerous flashpoints on Earth. Military power, global supply chains, and the balance of the Pacific all now hinge on what happens to this single island. China's position is driven by its One China policy, which gained international traction after Richard Nixon signed the Shanghai Communique in 1972. The agreement acknowledged that both sides of the Taiwan Strait believe there is only one China, and that Taiwan is part of it. The United States didn't fully endorse that claim, but it also didn't challenge it directly, instead calling for a peaceful resolution. That delicate balance still shapes global policy today. But China's strategy isn't limited to Taiwan. Across the region, it has steadily expanded its presence, asserting influence in the South China Sea, Sea of Japan, Indian Ocean, and the Western Pacific Ocean. It has built artificial islands, expanded military bases, and rapidly grown its navy. And tensions are rising. The Philippines has recently faced some of the most aggressive encounters yet. Chinese Coast Guard ships using water cannons, blocking maneuvers, and intimidation tactics against both civilian and military vessels. In response, Manila is strengthening its alliance with the United States, including plans for increased missile deployments. Meanwhile, Japan has reported repeated incursions near the Senkaku Islands, with Chinese vessels chasing fishing boats. Australia has protested unsafe aerial encounters, including a Chinese fighter releasing flares dangerously close to a surveillance aircraft. This isn't random. China's approach is calculated. Instead of triggering outright war, it keeps tensions simmering across multiple regions, just below the threshold of conflict. The goal? To stretch global attention thin and shift focus away from Taiwan. By increasing air and sea incursions, China forces other nations to respond elsewhere, making it harder to react quickly if something happens in the Taiwan Strait. And when incidents occur, Beijing often flips the narrative, claiming the other side provoked it. It's a strategy of high pressure, low visibility, showing power without crossing the line that would trigger a full-scale military response. At least, not yet. One reason this strategy works is because of how international defense treaties are structured. For example, NATO's Article 5, the famous Collective Defense Clause, only applies to attacks in specific regions like Europe or North America. Taiwan, it falls outside that zone, but things get complicated fast. The US-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty states that an armed attack on either side could trigger a military response. The US-Japan Security Treaty goes even further, committing the US to defend territories under Japanese administration. So, if a Taiwan conflict spills into nearby areas, or involves Japan directly, it could pull major powers into the fight almost instantly. China's naval expansion isn't hypothetical anymore. It's already here. According to US assessments, China now operates over 370 warships, with projections reaching 435 by 2030. That doesn't even include swarms of smaller missile boats like the fast and heavily armed Type 022 class. These smaller vessels are cheap, fast to build, and ideal for overwhelming defenses in a Taiwan scenario. China currently operates 3 aircraft carriers: Liaoning, Shandong, Fujian. The newest, Fujian, launched in November 2025, marks a major leap forward. It uses electromagnetic catapults, allowing heavier aircraft and faster launch cycles, bringing it closer to US carrier capabilities. Its future air wing could include stealth fighters, airborne early warning aircraft, electronic warfare planes, helicopters and drones, and China isn't stopping there. Plans suggest as many as 9 carriers by 2035, transforming its navy into a true blue water force capable of projecting power far beyond its shores. All of this leads to one unavoidable conclusion. This isn't just about Taiwan anymore. It's about who controls the future balance of power in the Pacific. And the world may be closer to that answer than it realizes. Even after a warship is officially commissioned, it's not instantly ready for battle. Analysts say it can take at least a year, or more, before a new vessel reaches full operational capability. Why? Because every system, every crew, and every piece of technology still has to be tested, integrated, and proven under real conditions. And right now, China is racing through that process. At the center of all this buildup is one critical objective: control of the South China Sea. This isn't just a stretch of water, it's a $3 trillion trade highway covering roughly 1.4 million square miles. Vital shipping lanes pass through choke points like the Strait of Malacca, making it one of the most economically important regions on the planet. And as history shows, major conflicts are often driven by economics. So how does China plan to secure it? Between 2021 and 2025, China launched 10 submarines, a mix of diesel-electric and nuclear-powered vessels, outpacing US production during the same period. Its shipbuilding industry is now the largest in the world, capable of producing submarines, surface warships, amphibious assault ships, and support vessels at scale. New shipyards are expanding that capacity even further. But there's a catch. Yes, China's fleet is growing fast, faster than any navy in the world. But experts point out a critical gap: capability versus numbers. Despite rapid expansion, and even allegations of technology theft, Chinese naval systems still lag behind in key areas. For example, US submarines are extremely quiet, making them incredibly hard to detect. Chinese submarines, by comparison, are much noisier and easier to track. And naval power isn't just about how many ships you have, it's about whether you can use them effectively in a real war. China doesn't just have to match one opponent. In a potential conflict, it would likely face a coalition, including forces from the United States and its regional allies. China's Air Force, while large, includes about 3,300 aircraft, with roughly 1,500 combat-ready jets. The rest include transports, tankers, trainers, and helicopters. That sounds impressive, until you compare it to the combined strength of multiple allied nations. And then there's logistics. Sustaining a large-scale military operation over time, especially under pressure from a coalition, requires enormous economic and supply chain strength. Right now, many analysts believe China isn't fully prepared for that level of sustained warfare, and Beijing knows it. Instead of rushing into open conflict, China is leaning into a different tactic: blockade and isolation. By surrounding key areas, especially Taiwan, China could cut off trade, restrict access, and slowly squeeze an economy without firing a single shot. At the same time, it can maintain an air umbrella overhead, controlling the skies while its navy holds position nearby, ready to strike if needed. It's a strategy designed to win without triggering full-scale war. There's another challenge China faces, one that can't be solved quickly. Aircraft carriers. China's newest carrier, Fujian, represents a major technological leap, but technology alone isn't enough. Operating a true carrier strike group requires years, sometimes decades, of experience. It's about mastering flight deck operations, pilot training under extreme conditions, maintenance cycles, anti-submarine coordination, long-range logistics, and most importantly, real-world experience. That's something you can't mass-produce. There's one final, critical weakness. China hasn't fought a major war in decades. Its last large-scale conflict was during the Korean War, a very different kind of fight, focused on land and air combat. A modern naval invasion, especially one targeting Taiwan, would be far more complex. And that brings us to the biggest obstacle of all. Invading Taiwan isn't just risky, it's logistically overwhelming. To move a large army across the sea, China would need massive numbers of amphibious landing ships. And here's the trade-off. Every shipyard building carriers or submarines is a shipyard not building invasion transports. In other words, China faces a difficult choice: project global power, or prepare for a full-scale invasion. Doing both at the same time? That's a challenge even the world's largest navy can't easily overcome. And that's what makes this situation so tense. China is stronger than ever, but the gap between ambition and execution may still decide what happens next. Amphibious warfare isn't something you figure out overnight. In fact, it's widely considered the most complex operation in naval combat, even more demanding than carrier strikes, air operations, or submarine warfare. It requires perfect coordination between sea, air, and ground forces, all happening at once, under fire. And China knows just how difficult that is. In April 2022, China launched massive military drills around Taiwan, effectively surrounding the island. There were live-fire exercises, ballistic missile launches, and even missiles that flew directly over Taiwan. Some landed dangerously close, in waters within Japan's exclusive zone. It was a powerful show of force, but it also revealed something else: limitations. After another wave of high-intensity drills in August 2022, China quietly shifted tactics. Instead of dramatic crisis-level exercises, it moved toward constant, lower-profile pressure, regular patrols, air incursions, and naval presence around the Taiwan Strait. Less dramatic, more persistent, and arguably, more effective. Fast forward to late 2025. More than 90 Chinese ships were operating around Taiwan, not in open conflict, but in positions that looked suspiciously like a blockade rehearsal. The key difference? No official declaration, because declaring a blockade would be an act of war. So instead, China applies pressure just below that threshold, testing reactions, probing defenses, and normalizing its presence. China's interest in Taiwan goes far beyond politics. Control Taiwan, and China gains a strategic advantage stretching from the South China Sea all the way to the Sea of Japan, a massive shift in regional power. Second, technology and economics. Taiwan is a global leader in semiconductors, aerospace, biomedicine, advanced defense tech, including drone systems. These industries power not just the US, but much of the global economy. For China, gaining control of Taiwan means gaining control over some of the most critical technologies on Earth. But there's only one way to do that: occupation. The world isn't ignoring this. A powerful coalition, including the G7 nations and partners like Australia, has made its stance clear: no forced takeover of Taiwan. This group includes the United States, Japan, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Canada. Their strategy: economic pressure, political deterrence, and military readiness without starting a war. Among them, Japan stands out. Because of its location and military posture, Japan is arguably the most critical frontline ally in any Taiwan scenario. Right behind it is the Philippines, whose northern islands sit just south of Taiwan, making it a key staging and support area. The reality on the ground is shifting fast. The US and the Philippines are expanding cooperation. More joint exercises, more deployments, and even advanced missile systems positioned closer to potential flashpoints. That matters, because geography could decide everything. Meanwhile, Australia and New Zealand strongly support deterrence, but avoid promising automatic military involvement. The United Kingdom and Canada are vocal diplomatically, though their military roles would likely be more limited. Across the board, the message is consistent. No one wants to change the status quo by force, but everyone is preparing, just in case. If China launches an attack on Taiwan, the response would likely be swift and massive. Led by the United States, a coalition effort could include rapid air and naval strikes, sea denial operations to block Chinese movement, intelligence, surveillance, and targeting systems, ISR, cyber warfare, and a constant flow of weapons and supplies into Taiwan. On top of that, global sanctions and diplomatic isolation aimed at crippling China's economy. And perhaps most importantly, a strong US naval presence alone could dramatically shift the balance, making any invasion far more difficult than it might appear on paper. All of this builds toward a single, unavoidable reality. This isn't just a regional dispute anymore. It's a high-stakes test of military power, economic control, and global alliances. And if the line is ever crossed, the response won't be small. It will be world-defining. If a conflict over Taiwan ever erupts, one thing is increasingly clear: Japan would almost certainly be pulled into it, possibly even targeted early on. Not necessarily as the main objective, but as a critical stepping stone. Why? Because Japan provides everything needed to sustain a major military campaign. Forward bases, fuel and repair hubs, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR, missile defense, and even direct combat support. In other words, Japan is the backbone of any US-led response in the region, and Tokyo knows it. Recent shifts in Japan's security policy signal higher readiness and fewer restrictions on using military force, marking a major change from its traditionally restrained posture. Other allies would play key roles, but in very different ways. Australia, for example, brings high-value capabilities: advanced submarines, P-8 surveillance aircraft, cyber warfare, logistics and specialized naval and air support. While Canberra has avoided promising automatic involvement, its defense cooperation with the US continues to deepen under frameworks like OSMAN, quietly building a more integrated military partnership. The United Kingdom would likely contribute in more strategic ways: intelligence and cyber operations, economic sanctions, a limited naval presence, and selective strike capabilities, but it wouldn't carry the main burden of combat. Canada, with more limited military capacity, would support through sanctions and export controls, diplomatic alignment, intelligence sharing, and possibly small naval deployments for escort missions. As for the European Union, its role would lean heavily toward economic and political pressure rather than direct military involvement. Even major powers like Germany and France are not expected to play a decisive combat role in such a scenario. Despite its massive military buildup, many analysts argue that China still isn't ready for a full-scale war over Taiwan. On paper, the numbers look impressive, but real-world warfare depends on far more than numbers. Training, experience, coordination, logistics, and economic endurance. Right now, those gaps still matter. China's military hasn't faced a modern large-scale conflict in decades, and sustaining a prolonged war, especially against a coalition, would push its systems to the limit. If China truly believed it could successfully invade Taiwan with minimal resistance, it likely would have already tried. Instead, it continues to rely on a different approach: constant pressure without open war. At the same time, China's potential support network is limited. Russia, often seen as a strategic partner, has been heavily strained by the war in Ukraine, facing economic pressure and weakened military capacity. Energy imports from Russia and Iran help keep China running, but in a full conflict, sanctions, embargoes, and blockades could quickly choke off those lifelines. Some estimates suggest that under sustained pressure, China's military operations could face serious constraints in just a few months, especially if confronted by a coordinated global response. For now, China's approach remains calculated. It continues to maintain a constant military presence near Taiwan, expand influence across the region, and reinforce its territorial claims over time, all while carefully avoiding the one move that could trigger a full-scale war, because crossing that line could unleash a response far bigger than the conflict itself. Taiwan remains outside Beijing's control for one simple reason: the cost of taking it could be enormous. Its location makes it a strategic keystone in the Pacific. Its technology powers the global economy, and its fate could reshape the balance of power, not just in Asia, but across the world. China is steadily building the capability to act, but capability doesn't always lead to action. In the end, Taiwan's future will come down to three things: political decisions, military readiness, and whether the world is willing to respond when it matters most. Because if that moment ever comes, it won't just decide Taiwan's fate. It could redefine the global order.